Hi, and welcome to a bonus episode of the Geek Warning and Performance Process podcast, brought to you by the Escape Collective. I'm Dave Rome, and normally we put these bonus episodes into our member-only feed, but this time we're keeping it wide open to help tease the sort of content that those on our free feed typically miss out on. While listening to this episode, you may want to see what these fresh pro bikes actually look like. If so, head to the tech section of escapecollective.com, where you'll find full galleries of the men's and women's pro bikes for 2025. I do have a small favor to ask. If you like this episode, then please share it with a friend and tell them about Escape Collective. Okay, on with the show. Okay, so I'm here in the event village of the Tour Down Under for the 2025 edition of the race, the 25th year, and walking with me is Aerodynamics expert John Pitman. So, John, if you've listened to the Performance Process episode with Ronan, John was on recently talking about various things, and John recently became the head of Aerodynamics at the, short for SASI wind tunnel, but what is it exactly?
It's the Australian Centre for Sports Aerodynamics. So a lot of the stuff we do is on cycling, but then the other kind of big portion of what we do is on sports. So winter sports, sliding sports, anything that's got an aerodynamic performance component, we get involved with. Running, swimming, athletics, wheelchair racing.
Yeah, and you've had quite a career leading up to this. I mean, you've been around wind tunnels for a long time. Can you give us a brief reminder / overview of your background?
So started off in my aero career at Jaguar Land Rover. There was a link there with Team Sky. So got midway through the time there, we got involved with doing some kind of initially marketing exercises that then became credible engineering involvement with various projects like Pinarello bikes and cask helmets and little bits and pieces with the team. That led to a job at Australian cycling team by a guy that worked at Sky as well. And so I was there for 5 years, working all aspects of the aero performance. Then left and did about 18 months independent consulting, and after that I'm now here, employee of the South Australian government, running the new wind tunnel.
Well, thank you, John. So I mean, it's apologies up front. There may be some mess in the audio because we are in an area where there's dozens of mechanics at work, each one with their own air compressor, so it might get a little bit noisy, but we'll call it atmosphere. But yeah, we're going to walk around. Basically, every single team in the World Tour is out and about at the moment. They've all got their fresh bikes, so I mean, it's the perfect time to be walking around with someone who's the head of Aerodynamics, and I am told that John's involved with contracting to one or two brands, but we won't find out which one. That's all secret. But let's go for a walk and talk about what we can see today. So, I mean, yeah, right now we're standing outside of Alpeston de Koonik Canyon bikes. I mean, is there anything that you're seeing here that you've seen from this team that's in the Canyon bikes?
Yeah, well, this bike this guy got in the stand looks like a new one. I have to say I'm not 100% sort of up on my what's new and what's not new, but it looks like they've slimmed the fork down a bit on the front. Probably just maintaining aero and losing a bit of weight out of it. It's kind of that's the way things are going. You know, there's a bit of a prevailing theme that's kind of going up and down in terms of 1 week. People are saying everyone's going to one bike, and then the next week people are saying, oh no, aero bikes are coming back in, and they're going to have two.
That was very 2024. We're in 2025 now. It's the aero bike is back. So
whoever the bike industry puppet master is keeps on changing their mind.
So I mean, I'm looking at this canyon, and it does bring up a question I've been having by photographing just about every bike here over the last few days, which is I am seeing a very common trend in the bottom bracket area amongst these aero bikes, like that sort of like flattened edge that's comes off the like a elongated bottom bracket area. Basically, almost every aero bike I've shot has what I would consider that same sort of junction. I mean, what's going on there? Why is everyone landing on this idea?
So you mean running the chainstay all the way through to? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, like that sort of like the chainstay sort of almost coming forward of the bottom bracket and around the shell, and you can almost see the line of the chainstay coming up straight into the bottom bracket area.
Essentially, you want to match the flow tangent coming off the seat tube with the width of the tyre that it's going to land onto just downstream. Previously, that was, and this is how things go. People work out ways of enabling aero features like that. It's a fairly kind of obvious one to do, but in the past you might have not done it because you wanted to maintain stiffness in that area, but as time goes on, people work out how to have your cake and eat it. It's not a massive thing, but it's just one of the details you would look to have. Managing the flow off the seat tube onto the rear wheel is definitely kind of an area that you spend a fair bit of time working on. The other side with the front derailleur and how the flow goes in and amongst the chain rings and stuff, that's quite constrained in there, so the size of the flow channel you have in there is a thing as well. The bottle cage, that is kind of a bit of an elephant in the room as well. If you've got a bottle in there, then the only bit that's having a sort of clean airflow is the bit above it and the bit below it, so that would be squeezing some air down towards that bit where the cranks are.
Well, maybe we'll come back to bottles as we'll walk around the room. Let's keep walking. Okay, so now we're at UAE. They don't have that new Y1 RS, which is the super aero bike that just came out. They brought the more practical bike to travel with, which is their V4 RS. What are you seeing here? It's much more on the everything bike rather than being a pure aero bike. It's clearly more optimized for weight than pure aero, but are there aero elements in this?
Yeah, for sure. I've never really looked at it that closely, in the flesh. But it looks like the down tube shape is reminiscent of the Scott foil, which was one of the first bikes to do that. Chop the nose off an aerofoil, that sort of thing. So yeah, it looks pretty efficient. Definitely. It's definitely skewed towards the lightweight first, and then make it as aero as possible, kind of thing. But the handlebar, the cockpit setup there is really tidy, and that's one of the, whatever the frame set is, if you've got that dialed in, then you can carve a lot of drag off doing that. So that's, if you'd have had a set of round handlebars on an aero bike in the past, you'd kind of halved the possible drag you could have gained. NV wheels with the right size tyres on. So you can see
the right size is in from a UCI perspective, or
well matched to the rim width. But you can definitely see that you'd have room to improve relative to that with an aero bike. There was probably some conscious thought that this is going to be for this purpose, and then there'll be another aero bike afterwards. You might have taken a few more, given things a bit more chord length here and there, if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, so this team, I guess, are one of the first to be on what I'd consider a modern wide width, sort of with that internal rim width. I think their tyres are coming out close to a 31 measured. Your thoughts on that? Do you think tyres are getting too wide for this purpose of going fast?
I don't have an opinion, really. The rolling resistance comes down, weight goes up, aero goes up a little bit. How that all balances out, I don't think they need to get any bigger. We do a lot of performance modelling in my job, and I think you probably wouldn't run that size on a time trial bike. 28, 30, I think it's probably about as big as it needs to go on the road. Whether it's too big or not, there's tyres have obviously performed so many functions. For an aero guy to say it's probably not the right thing, but
Yeah. All right, I'm going to walk you towards the women's team of Uno X, who have a new Ridley, and I'm going to ask you another tyre question there. All right, John. So we're now at the end of the hall, and there's a Ridley here. The new Noah Fast just came out officially yesterday. It's their aero bike. They don't have the finished cockpit on there yet. That's going to be a one-piece once they're back in Europe. But A question on this one. This team is actually running mismatched tires. So they've got the new Aero 111 from Continental on the front, and then they're running like probably a GP 5000 tubeless on the back. I believe it's 26 mil front, 28 mil rear. Yeah, I mean, what do you think of that idea? They're not the only ones to be doing that. I think Ineos has the exact same tire combo. There's a few others in the room that do, but thoughts?
I think it's a very sensible idea.
Okay.
Yeah. I think but the only downside is you're going to have a kind of a grip difference front to rear, because one of them's going to bounce differently to the other.
Yep.
But your weight distribution is about 60-40 on bikes in favour of the rear, obviously. So your rolling resistance is in that proportion as well, so it makes sense to bias it there at the back and then get some aero gains at the front with a few mil less. And
have you had this tire in the wind tunnel in the wind tunnel that you manage, and have you seen anything? Yeah, you haven't had yet. Okay, all right. Is that something that you'd normally put in the wind tunnel, or is it really athlete dependent that you'd have to have an athlete that's?
Oh no, you would definitely be trying to measure that sort of thing with a mannequin on the bike. Okay. Yeah, with a pedalling athlete on there. I generally if you're doing wheel benchmarking, bike benchmarking, that sort of thing, you want to minimise your other noise factors. Yep. And I fully expect that this probably has a bit of benefit. Mm-hmm. Once your prerequisite is that the width is appropriate for the rim. Yep. And then once that's in place, then these refinement of these features could definitely be a thing. And I'm sure there's some credible engineering gone into it by Swiss side. And why not?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I was teased that they're going to go wider later in the season, which to me suggests maybe a wider rim to match. But I think they suggest maybe as wide as like 29 front, 30 rear. Yeah,
I mean, you if your fork isn't big enough to allow air to pass between, then you might start choking the flow around the top of the fork if you go too big. Generally, when you design bikes, you pick a tyre size to design to. But this on this bike's got the standout things is the head tube is pretty fully dedicated to aero there.
Yeah, they're one of the first to market with around the new relaxed UCI rules around how big that section can be. I mean, we're looking at the top tube comes up basically in line or even above if you're really slammed above that stem. What are your thoughts on that sort of design of having like that stem flow into the top tube?
Yeah, it's good. And again, it's probably not as, obviously the way that this is at the moment, you're leaving a bit on the table there. But when they get the proper cockpit in, it'd be very nice. But so once it's all faired in, if that stem sits a little bit above the top tube, it's not too big a deal. Not having gaps and sharp edges and stuff lower down is not what you want.
Yeah. Anything else before we move on that you're seeing in this bike? I mean, you're seeing it for the very first time, so I'm putting you on the spot. But
I have actually seen it before.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the head tube is one of the really kind of strong flow steering features on the bike, obviously with the fork, and that's maxed that out. So you're really helping to steer the flow the way it needs to be steered with that feature on the front there.
That brings up a question I've got, which is some bikes are using 1.5 inch size bearings top and bottom to fit the cables through. Other bikes are taking flattening the steerer tube or reducing the diameter of the steerer tube to squeeze the cables into a smaller bearing, which reduces that frontal area. Thoughts on that? Have you seen any reason to say a smaller bearing's faster? Or
no, I've not put a great deal of thought into that, to be honest. Fortunately, it's not something I have to worry about. It's essentially you want to have the shape that you want to have, and if there are external constraints like packaging for that reason, then that might be something that the bike engineer comes up with. But what the arrangement is inside the head tube, I don't get too involved in that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm more thinking like the external size of it, the impact that might have. Smaller bearing would have a smaller frontal area. Yeah,
well, that's a given. I know you saw the Factor track bike this year, very, very narrow on the front. If you can go thinner, then yeah, again, what's the right trade-off between, mechanical design and aero is case dependent. So
I've got another question on that, because we're going to walk to Israel Premier Tech with they're on the Factor Ostro, and that one has basically following on that head tube story. I mean, it's a very hourglass shaped head tube, so I'd be keen to just get some thoughts once we're looking at that. Hourglass head tube versus a head tube that doesn't have such a shape to it, that's just basically like straight down the head tube. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's definitely something you'd want to do if you can. Yeah, not much more to say than that really. There's a whole lot more to it than frontal area, but essentially assuming you can have a effective flow steering section in the middle hourglass bit, then making it smaller would be better.
So less material from a front on, typically always better?
Yeah, but sometimes a bigger thing will outperform a smaller thing if the shape is better. So that's why you have your CD and you have your A. Generally in cycling, things that travel at the same speed and the same sort of size, you never try and split them apart. But it's shape efficiency is number one. Generally frontal area is number two, but if you can have both, why wouldn't you?
Okay. That brings us to the bikes of we're standing outside the Quick Step team, so Sedal Quick Step. I mean, there's quite a bit of specialized in the room, but yeah, they're all on the Tarmac SL8, which is yet another, it's probably the lightest bike, maybe one of the lightest in the room. Yeah, I mean, from an aero sense, I mean, what are your thoughts on this bike?
Yeah, I guess it's I think it's an evolution of the Tarmac. They're one of these ones that's kind of binned off the dedicated aero bike and poured it all into this one. You could certainly be more aero if you had a more extremely aeroed bike, but it doesn't perform badly, clearly, and that's one of the things in road racing, and a whole host of different reasons. Teams not having to travel everywhere with two of each bike. Aside from the philosophy side of it, it's kind of got a lot of detail thought there, and I looked at the white paper, and there's sort of a real systems engineering approach to mass aero stiffness. It's clearly a very good bike, so yeah.
I mean, we were just discussing head tubes, and it's hard to talk about the Tarmac without the nose that is its head tube. It's not a totally new idea, and if I'm not mistaken, I mean, your time with Jaguar, you helped with collab with Pinarello back then. I think it was the F8. Is the F8 the one that did that had that sort of elongated, that sort of nose to it, that leading edge?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So kind of overlaid an aerofoil and said, well, we want. And that's, it comes back to the hourglassing thing. And back then the rules were a little bit different, but if you want a certain minimum thickness and you want a certain aerofoil shape, that means you have to have a nose that comes further forward. So yeah, that's.
I mean, I'm probably putting you on a spot with something you've probably long forgotten, but do you remember roughly what sort of benefit that nose would bring versus just straight round head tube, or a round leading edge to it?
Oh, round leading edge. Yeah, you'd be, big. Say if your CDA of a person on a bike is 0.250, let's say. If you went from round fronted to with a nose on, you're probably 253, something like that. So, kind of 1%, 1-2%.
Enough to matter.
Yeah, and then if you're starting to increase the chord further back and have a sort of a nice smooth lead into the down tube and top tube and manage to flow around the top of the fork, then it just gains and gains and gains. But this it kind of looks like a round tubed bike, the S-Works, but it performs 10 times better than in inverted commas round tube bike from 10 years ago. So yeah.
Okay, that's it's very interesting to hear, actually. All right, let's walk down here toward the crowd, toward the noise. I think there's we've got Giant, we've got Trek. I'm going to take you via Trek. they're actually not there at the moment. But I want to know, we kind of hinted before about bottle cages and bottles and how that's kind of the elephant in the room, I think you called it. So speaking of bottles, I mean, Trek, they've got their aero bottles and aero cages. I mean, do you believe that these would be measurable differences? Like, I know Ronan's been playing with it and just confused himself. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh yeah, for sure. If you could, and this was something that people have. It's one of the first things I ever thought about. Was like, can you just have a smaller bottle? Can you couple them closer together? So the only thing that was ever restraining it was the use case. As time goes on, a lot of the other things that you can do that you would do before doing that get done, and then you're like, well, why wouldn't you try doing this? And if riders don't want to use it, I think they made it so you can put a round bottle in there, which is the smart move. But if you can make it sort of a continuation of the tube shape, and you'll tickle a little bit more drag off.
Yeah, I mean that again, like Factor's not on display right now. They're packed up for the day. But I noticed they've just introduced their own like black ink bottle cages that kind of try to fill the shape off the down tube and off the seat tube. They're like bottle cages directly to the frame. Still running a standard round bottle, but thoughts?
Yeah, it's I think they've got different cages on the down tube and the seat tube. So that's definitely one thing. And then managing the flow, because a lot of the time your main rider would generally only have one bottle on the bike. Maybe towards the end of this stage might have none, but you're going to think about that empty bottle cage scenario. And I think that Factor one, you're using the cage to manage the flow around the seat tube.
We're in view of Van Rysel bikes with the team there. Decathlon AG2R. I think these bikes kind of came out, made a lot of noise at the beginning of last season. From what you've seen, I mean, there's another JP involved in the creation of these. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I just I'm looking top down on it, just how wide the top tube is. Top tube is in plan view. Yeah, that's quite. I'm not sure. Is this? Well, that one's different to that one, isn't it?
That one's we've got the climbing bike on the right and the aero bike on the left. So.
Yeah, even the climbing bike is kind of like the what was the bike we were talking about earlier with the Colnago. Yeah, you've got the heavily truncated aerofoil shape on the down tube of the climbing bike, and then the aero bike's just a bit more of a aerofoil, and it's kind of really tidy cockpits on those bikes as well. The Dida cockpit,
super deep section on the handlebar of the I think it's a VR, but anyway, super deep section on the handlebar, the Dida handlebar of their aero bike. I mean, what are your thoughts there? Like, is there a point where it gets too deep, or is it? I mean, at a point it wouldn't be practical to hold on to anymore. But thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're kind of into diminishing returns. I think the bars can be 8 centimeters cord. So
I'm not Ronan. I don't know that stuff off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'd have to check myself on that one. But the deeper cord bar will generally give you more, and you've got the hands there, which are turning the flow all sorts of different ways. Any piece of flat aerofoil shaped geometry you can put in proximity to those is going to straighten the flow back up again, which is always a good thing.
A trend I've also been spotting is flared handlebars or more traditional handlebars. I mean, if you were designing a bike tomorrow, which way would you be going? Would you be going like to, I guess, maximize the angle of the hoods and all that with a flared bar?
Yeah, that's fairly kind of uncontroversial kind of thing to say. Is have a the most aero position for your forearms is to have them flat, and the way to have that is to have your hands on the hoods, and therefore if you can have them a bit narrower, that it's a kind of a logical progression really. And then if you want the control when you're on the descents, put them wider down there. So it's if you work back from those kind of use cases and what you want to be doing in those use cases, that's where you end up. and obviously UCI have got a limit now on how much your levers can be rolled in, so which is sensible.
Yeah, but that limit, I feel like it's it's basically that limit is almost controlled by the shape of the drop, so you can kind of sneak some more angle in there with a certain flare on the handlebar. So yeah, it's I guess that's probably what's driving the question is like knowing all that. Like flare is basically the only way to do it moving forward. Would you say?
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth. So
no, it's good. I mean, I think because the minimum bar width now is 35 centimeters. So yeah, how do you put your hands as close or below that as possible? I mean, there's been quite a few studies done in the public domain just looking at the effect of hand spacing on road bikes. The only thing is if it makes your elbows flare out, then you undo the gains. But believe what you read on the internet on that one. Sure.
Speaking of like rider fit trends we're seeing, I mean, shorter cranks has been all the buzz throughout the internet for months and months. I mean, is that something you've played with in the tunnel with athletes at all, that you've seen whether, as you know, like shorten the cranks, you have to raise the rider up effectively compared to the bike in most cases?
I tend to think about it the other way around. When you're talking about time trial bikes, you tend to use crank length as a bit of an enabler for alleviating the compression of the hip at the top of the pedal stroke, which is one of the things that obviously gets compressed when you either lower the front or lower the saddle. So generally you just want to lower the rider into the bike, and the reason you can't do that is because the thigh hits the stomach. So shortening the crank is a way around that. On the road bikes there's a whole different thing, climbing and that sort of thing. Crank length it's a bit of I see it as a bit of a rite of passage for most people. You kind of go through it, you investigate it, kind of settle on something. It's not a game changer in any particular way. People say, Pogacar's on 165s or whatever. You could put 170s on him, he'd still be pretty good.
Yeah. It's certainly a trend. It's like a buzzy thing in the world tour at the moment. Like I've had confirmation from someone at SRAM that for the first time in ever, basically, like they've been doing the job for more than a decade. For the first time, they've basically seen like a gigantic shift in demand for shorter cranks across the teams that they sponsor. Yeah. And then they were discussing like they're seeing the demand, and then there's a lot of other teams just sort of following suit. So like everyone seems to be shortening the cranks. I guess some people know why, and others just think there's something there without testing it. So I mean, it's
I think you're spot on. Some people know why they're doing it and they've tested it, and some people will go, oh, they're doing it, I'll do it as well, and it doesn't feel worse. Depends, if you're a track sprinter, if you're climbing in a mountain, there's a lot of different permutations. You can, it's just a tool in the box for tuning, basically. And maybe the average, World Tour rider size is suited to 165 rather than 170, and it's just 170 or 175 has just been, an arbitrary number. So.
Yeah. Okay. What else is there? I mean, let's go talk about Visma. All right, we're walking over to Visma. They're in the corner. The women's team isn't here, so it's just the men's team. I see John eyeing the Ineos Pinarello as we walk by it, so we might come back. All right, so Visma Lisa Biker in Australia, they've only brought the S5. Yep. I mean, this is one of the, I guess, the bike's more ahead of its time, and others are starting to follow suit. But what thoughts on their general setup? I mean, tell me what you're looking at. Tell me what you're thinking.
I love the S5 as a bike. I used to have one myself. Okay. I think a lot of people like it's kind of sort of a full intent aero bike, and then they've got the R5 to switch to. One of the really sort of strong features on it is the cockpit, and you've got that clean channel of air going down the middle, and that's one of the reasons why the S5 generally performs really well at those kind of low yaw conditions. But it's a time trial bike, just converted for the road, basically.
Time trial bike with drop bars.
Yeah, and Cervelo obviously, kind of developed all of those shapes. The wrapped seat tube and all that sort of thing, way before the S5. Yes.
It's interesting. Last night I was at an event where they launched the new giant Trinity, and the seat tube is almost identical. Looking at in my head the Trinity seat tube to the S5 seat tube. I mean, it's very slender. Follows the contour of the rear wheel. Is that a design that you love, or? Yeah,
it's having what it enables you to do is to push the seat post back, which is good for where the seat post is sitting relative to other things. So you can see the post on this, whoever's bike this is quite back on the rails. And it's also, I don't know what the angle of it is, but it's a bit more vertical, rather than, if you slant it's like a aircraft wing is inclined backwards a bit, and then you have a three-dimensionality on your surface flow, which is less good than if the wing is perfectly sort of straight. So you've got a bit of that going on, and then where the seat post sits relative to the legs is another thing. You see it with some of the new track bikes and that sort of thing. So inherently this and the Trinity have that. The Trinity had that for a long time.
Interesting. I'm looking at the bike. They're one of the Wahoo pedal sponsored teams. It's a trend that I've seen of amongst the teams that are using the Wahoo Speedplay pedals is a lot of the riders seem to have moved away from like the traditional like Speedplay Zero pedal and moved to the Aero pedal, which is a one-sided pedal with like a dimpled golf ball on the bottom of it. What do you think of pedals? Would that be the fastest pedal in the room?
If flow was hitting it, so it's fairly... what actually happens with pedals also kind of goes with intuition. If you're someone that pedals with your toes down, then the pedal's not really going to be seeing any airflow, so it won't make any difference. If your foot, and particularly at the top of the pedal stroke, if the foot is flat and you've got a bit of flow passing under the bottom of the shoe, then if you were a Speedplay rider, then the aero version of the Zero would be better than the non-aero version. If your toes down, it wouldn't make any measurable difference, and neither would putting a Shimano or whatever on. But
what pedal do you use?
Shimano.
All right.
But I'm not paid to ride my bike, so. Sure.
All right. You did eye up the Pinarello as we walked past it. The new Dogma F. They're another team that I've seen them running the narrow aero tire on the front from Continental, wider, potentially lower rolling resistance tire on the back. Not much else has changed in this bike, I guess, since we've seen it. But as someone who previously designed bikes for this team, what are you seeing now?
I think it's had the sort of a common design team for a long time, since they've been doing aero bikes. And they've really just continued to evolve the concept. I think the bottle indent on the down tube, and they've got some of the kind of Pinarello design language has stayed in there with some of the fork curvature and that sort of thing. Little things like how you clamp the seat post in, from the back rather than.
Something I'm seeing more and more brands copy, like the new X Lab, which we might have walked past. No, they've put away. They've done that as well. Yeah,
so it's it's a highly evolved race bike. I always find it curious that they never really get put into the group tests that magazines and things do. I'm not quite sure why that is. But
I could be mistaken, but it may be Pinarello not wanting to be compared. But sometimes, and it's not the sort of bike that most media outlets can afford to buy for themselves. So it's.
Yeah, not much more to say really, but it's just a really good bike. Yeah.
Forster Pinarello has his way with that design language that you spoke about, with the wavy fork and the top tube. You can definitely pick this one out without there's no paint on it. But if from a pure aerodynamics point of view, would you make that fork a straight leg?
No, that's not really. If you had a disc wheel in there, you might kind of find a better. There's a lot more interaction between the wheel when you've got either like a tri-spoke or something, or a disc like you would maybe use on the track. But for this road application, no, I think they've got the tabs on the bottom by the dropout, which was one of they were the sort of early people to do that, and there's no reason you can't have a bit of aesthetic license in there, I would say.
Tell me about those tabs, because I mean there's an increasing number of bikes that have it. The most extreme is that new X-Lab with the Astana. That is definitely the most extreme example I've seen. They're incredibly thin tabs that elongate quite far, but I mean what's the design goal there? What is that tab achieving?
It's just a little extra length for the flow to reattach onto, and you've got the axle obviously in that height, and that's the reason there's that you got that 5 centimeter window in the regulations where you can have it. It's just a little bit of extra surface to straighten the flow back up after it's been disrupted by the axle. So it's going to give you more value there than it would further up the fork leg, but it's a very small amount. Again, you do 10 of those things all around the bike and you've got a nice little gain. So
while I'm thinking of it, I mean the Ineos mechanics for years have they've foregone using finishing tape, although as I say that I think we've got finishing tape being used, but they typically super glue the ends of the handlebar tape to the handlebar, so they don't have the finishing tape, so it's just like a clean look. I mean, is that something you think you'd be able to detect in the wind tunnel?
Bar tape in general is definitely a thing, and you want to have as little of it as possible, and still maintain functionality and that sort of thing.
Here comes the super glue.
If it's glued or if it's taped, I guess gluing it means that you've not got sort of 10 mil of tape inboard of that, which would be slightly better. If everything looks perfectly prepared, really, really smart, then you're going to be feeling pretty good about things, and I think it's probably as much that as...
It does look cool. I'll give them that, yeah. So, all right. I mean, it's I guess it's an important bike to talk about because it's personally, and this is highly subjective, but I think it's the ugliest bike in the room. Bianchi's aero bike. I mean, we spoke about the Cervelo S5 before. I feel like Bianchi's kind of looked at that bike as maybe some inspiration when you look at their cockpit, and gone completely different direction with the actual design of it. But I mean, we're looking square on to the front end now. What are your thoughts on this thing? It's got what looks like a lot of bunch of like trip lines built into the fork, head tube. I'm not gonna lie, it makes me queasy, but I'm just a traditionalist. So yeah, Bianchi Ultra, I think it came out last year. Yeah, you can see details in the fork. It's got those interesting I don't know what you'd call them, trips I guess they are in the head tube, little ridges extrude out. All right, I won't ask you about the aesthetics of it, but aerodynamically, I mean, what do you think are these features legitimate as far as making the bike faster?
The little bumps and bits and pieces, I think they're probably more towards the aesthetic side. They're probably not putting the drag up.
What about that stem? I mean, the stem to me, like, it raises up at an angle. To my eye, that would increase drag, but like versus like a shape that's fully flat to the wind, more like the Ridley off the top of my head. But I mean, yeah, what would you be thinking there without having tested this bike?
Yeah, well, obviously, so number one is getting the rider in a position that is, biomechanically efficient and aerodynamically efficient. So if having the bars at that height enables them to have flat forearms, that will trounce the fact that maybe you've got a bit more drag on the stem. There might be a even better way of doing that, but it's all relative, and I think it's probably fair to say this is probably an improvement on the previous aero bike. Yeah, it's kind of the way these things go sometimes. Yeah.
I'm jumping around a hell of a lot here, but another trend I'm seeing and that I'm hearing is like a lot of brands will be going to carbon spokes versus like a traditional like light bladed steel spoke. Seems to be it saves weight, increases the wheel stiffness. Is that something you've had a chance to test?
If you're going to maintain the aero performance and you're going to make it stiffer and lighter, then that's a no-brainer. Spoke shape is definitely a thing. The current spoke shapes are already pretty good. The CX-ray shape, and that's been around for a long time.
So say it was the carbon spoke was the same thickness of that but deeper. What do you imagine that would do?
Yeah, you can probably improve a little bit.
NDA. All right.
Yeah.
Yep. So before we wrap up, I mean, John just mentioned to me that he spotted that a trend is that they're sort of enclosing the rear through axle and also the front through axle in some cases. Sort of, rather than having a hole there on the opposite side to where you'd bolt it up, it's enclosed. I think, to top of my head, I'm going to say BMC might have been the first to this one. What's that detail? What is it about?
As you're into diminishing returns, or maybe you think you're into diminishing returns, then that's the sort of thing you do. Fair everything over. It's just like smoothing things over with tape, which you didn't used to be able to do, and now you can. It's improved aesthetics. It'd be a tiny, tiny little bit of aero. But yeah, just noticing a lot of them are doing it, and if you're that's your top line bike and you want to make it look as premium as possible, then that's what you do.
Okay. Well, thank you, John. Of all the bikes in the room, is there one that, I mean, it's hard to say, but like, who do you think's leading this race in the World Tour at the moment? Who's got the fast? Like, if you were to put them all in the wind tunnel, in team spec, I mean, who like I'm guessing you haven't done that. You haven't put all 18 bikes in there for the Men's World Tour, but is there one that you think would probably fare the best?
I would answer it this way. I don't know if this is compatible with the Escape Collective brand versus Cycling News, but the Cycling News did a group test.
Yes.
And there was a few bikes that came out really well in that.
I would push back on that a little bit. I think they didn't set up the bikes to have exact fit dimensions across all of them, so there was some variance in handlebar heights and that sort of thing in the test. But sorry, go on.
All that said, the results from that I think align quite well with what I've seen, and that also one of the tangible and useful outcomes of that is even if you're on the worst one, you're not a million miles away. And there are a few bad options there still, but amongst those top 10 brands, they're all pretty good. But the ranking in that group test was, I'd say fairly representative of. If I was being paid to ride my bike, as a privateer, and I'm going to buy a bike that is, aero, stiff, light, and all that. Yeah, the ranking in that was pretty good, I would say.
All right, not the plug I was looking for, but one we'll include. All right, John. Well, thank you very much for having to walk around with me. Where can people find out more about the wind tunnel that you're at? I mean, what's the story? Are you open to the public? Can they buy time in the tunnel? Are you just doing sort of more bigger contracts than that? What's the story?
Yeah, no. So you can just Google Australian Centre for Sports Aerodynamics. You can probably also just Google Adelaide Wind Tunnel, and we'll come up. So it's underneath the SASI, which is South Australian Sports Institute website. And we're open for if someone wants to come in and test their position on a triathlon bike, a time trial bike, road bike, try 2 different skin suits, helmets, all that sort of thing. You can come in for 2 hours, half a day, and contact details on the website. Yeah.
I was at an event last night where Luke Plapp kind of teased that he had been in the tunnel leading up to the national championships that he just won on the TT bike. Sounds like you've
Luke loves the aero, so yeah.
Sounds like you have quite a few of the Aussie national level riders coming through there. Yeah,
well, that's probably would think that'd be a fairly uncontroversial assumption to make. So obviously, and I was involved in the Aussie program before this role. The wind tunnel project is co-funded between the South Australian Government and the Australian Institute of Sport. So it's a not-for-profit organisation. but we do have the commercial arm there. So obviously we have to keep things very separate between that work and then any commercial work. And that, that's always a challenge in the cycling development sporting world, that you always look to help people out as much as possible in all these different events and things. So.
Thank you, John. That's a wrap on this special bonus episode of the Geek Warning and Performance Process podcast, recorded while on the ground at the Tour Down Under. If you like this episode, then please share it with a friend. Escape Collective isn't even 2 years old yet, and it needs more passionate cyclists to know about it. Cheers.